wanted to say how pleased we are to launch this report. We commissioned this research because we and Renew wanted to understand what people heard when we talked to them about energy efficiency, what they're doing in their own homes and the barriers they're facing. And we also wanted to ask them about the reforms that are on the table. And we wanted to do that to make sure that we're reflecting those views from consumers and consumer needs in our advocacy, as well as to make sure that we were building a rich and robust evidence base that could inform decisions and decision makers. We see this as really important because our capacity to build a net zero energy system depends heavily on the decisions that households and each household and each small business is going to make in the next 10 years and are making now. So it becomes an important link to take us through to that, to help bring customers along on that journey with us. We were particularly pleased that Minister McAllister was able to launch this report, not just because she's leading the energy efficiency agenda as in her portfolio as Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy, but also because of your long-standing commitment to an equitable journey to net zero. I went back and had a look at your Bank speech last night, and it made so clear the link between the need to take action on climate and the environment and the need to protect and strengthen the social bonds that cement our community. We think this research gives us some good indications of how we can build those bonds and make sure that we are bringing consumers along. So I'd like to welcome the Minister, please, to the stage.
Thank you very much, Kerry. That's a really thoughtful and kind introduction, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here at the Roundtable with you all this afternoon. Regrettably, I will not be staying for the drinking. In fact, after speaking with you now, I will need to go back up to the house because we, of course, are still sitting. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Lynn, thank you for hosting the event today, and thanks to all of you for being here. I know that everyone here is engaged in the really important task of bringing people along that journey that Kerry spoke about, an equitable journey to net zero, but also in the current environment, bringing down energy costs for consumers. I also want to congratulate Energy Consumers Australia and Renew for the energy efficient housing research that we are here to launch today. This is obviously an incredibly timely contribution, and I say that not just because there is a new government in Canberra ready to act and ready to work with you on these things, but also because of the significant challenges that Australia is facing and indeed the world. I've just come back from Egypt, from the COP meeting there, and of course the backstory which shaped so much of the discussion is, of course, two big crises. One, the war in Europe, and the second, the crises of climate. They are also some of the two biggest challenges that our government is seeking to tackle in our first months here. The grotesque illegal invasion of Ukraine and the withdrawal of gas supply from Europe has driven the price of energy up, not just in Europe, but around the world. And we are not immune here. It has effects on our businesses and on our households. Yesterday, also, in relation to the other crisis, the CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology released the State of the Climate report, and it confirmed what we all see, that changes to climate and an increase in extreme weather are all happening at an increased pace in Australia. Now, our government won't pretend that these challenges don't exist, and we won't play political games with them. We are attempting to deal with this in a serious and sober way. The IEA World Energy Outlook made this point. Climate policies and net zero commitments have been blamed in some quarters for contributing to the run-up in energy prices, but there is scant evidence for this. In the most affected regions, higher shares of renewable were correlated with low energy prices. So renewables are not just for the climate, but they are also from the economy. And this change and this transformation that we are working through is an important one for our medium and long-term interests. So many of you will be aware of this, our work on the supply side of the market. And Minister Bowen is leading this broad effort to reduce emissions and build the generation and transmission capacity that we require for our grid. There's a lot to do, and we're making up for a lost decade where really not enough happened. But as everyone in this room will understand, we have to deal with the demand side as well, and that is the job that Minister Bowen has tasked me with taking on. We know that reducing energy waste with more efficient homes, with more efficient appliances, doesn't just reduce emissions and save consumers money, it will also make that supply side transition much easier. And the body of evidence for that is compelling and impressive, and I can only imagine entirely familiar to all of you. But the IEA again sees energy efficiency as offering potentially 40% of the emissions abatement that is needed by 2040 across the globe. Closer to home, research in Victoria found that retrofitting a 2-star home and bringing it up to a 5-star rating could reduce energy use and bills by over 45%. And existing minimum energy efficiency and labelling requirements save the average household between $140 and $220 a year on electricity bills. And the bulk of that benefit comes through air conditioners, lighting and refrigerators. So the missing piece, of course, is how do we get consumers to engage? These are opportunities that need to be taken up in very small ways by a very large number of people. And that's the great shift that we need to think about and examine and understand. And so, of course, the research that is being launched today goes exactly to this question. What is it that consumers think about this opportunity? How do they understand it? And what are the barriers that they identified? I think bringing it back to people, as Lynn says, is really the task before us, and this report gives us a lot of information to understand how to do that. There are some really valuable insights. More than 2 of those surveyed don't consider themselves to be living in a highly efficient home. People actually understand that there's more that they could do. Those results are significantly worse for people who are financially vulnerable and people who are tenants. So while 39% of landlords rated their home as 8 out of 10 or above on energy performance, 22% of tenants were willing to offer that assessment, and just 13% of the financially vulnerable had the same confidence. We know that not only are renters and the vulnerable often not in a financial position to control their own environment, there are sometimes further barriers to realising those gains. So we do want, of course, homeowners and people who are in a financial position to make these changes to be able to do so. We want to make that easier. But we also need to maintain a particular focus on the needs of people who are not in that position. I think the really good news coming out of the research is that Australians are supportive of reform. They are interested in what we might do together as governments, as community, to make improvements. And from my perspective, that's extremely welcome news because we are determined to get on with that reform task. Early in October, I announced that the government would begin work on a national energy performance strategy. And so our aim is to drive down energy bills and emissions. So we want to prevent waste, we want to take the pressure off households, businesses, the energy system and the climate. We think about the strategy as a way of setting a long-term framework to bring focus to this area of policy, and it needs to be something that will work over the longer term. It'll be a strategy that pushes us forward and moves beyond a decade of delay at the Australian government level. I will acknowledge that whilst not much was happening at the Australian government level, there was a lot going on in states and territories and a lot going on in local government. And there's a lot that we can learn through those efforts And we are very, very keen to work with counterparts and to learn the lessons that have been built up over lots of hard work in those subnational jurisdictions. We hope that the strategy provides a framework and a space for that conversation to take place as well. But we've released now a consultation paper calling for submissions. I hope that most of you will have seen it, but it sets out a framework for how we're thinking about this challenge. We want to make sure that we bring demand-side thinking into our overall system of energy governance, and we're looking for information from all of you about how to best to do that. We've asked whether or not what the role of targets might be in the Australian context and what kind of target might work, and I hope that there might be people in this room who can contribute to that question. We've asked you to bring to us your thoughts about end users, what might be done for households, what might be done in businesses and what might be done in industry. And finally, we've asked you to think about supply chains. What parts of the supply chain might need to be built up to deliver on the promise of better energy performance? This is a genuine effort at consultation. We've put out a paper, we've provided, we hope, enough time for people to prepare a response and make a contribution. We are really looking forward to receiving those submissions, because the case for action really is compelling, but we need to get it right. We know the benefits of improving energy performance, but we need to get into the detail about how we are going to do it and sustain it over the longer term. Vital to that effort is centring Australians, giving them control over their energy use. If we want to empower Australians to do that, we need to know how they are thinking. So once again, can I congratulate ECA and Renew on the report? I am very, very happy to join you in launching it, and I think we can now consider it officially launched. So well done, all of you.
Thank you, Minister.
That is my pleasure.
No, that's right. Thank you very much.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Good luck this afternoon, everybody. It's a really great work.
Great. And it's all going to lead to a lot of great response to your consultation process.
Excellent. Shall I expect a top five?
That's right.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Now, I'd now like to introduce David Stolper from SCC Newgate, who's going to give us an overview of the key findings. David, and I should mention also his colleague Heather Jones, who couldn't be with us today, undertook this research for us, and I think you'll be as impressed by it as we were. So,
thank you. Fabulous. All right, well, thank you very much, Kerry. Thank you for the opportunity to be here at this great event today and actually talk about some of the highlights from the research that we conducted on energy efficient housing, and also to get people's feedback on some potential new initiatives and their responses to those. Just to reiterate, thank you very much for Energy Consumers Australia and also Renew for their support for this important piece of research. All righty. So just a little bit on the methodology and the approach that we took. So it was really quite in-depth consultation, qualitative and quantitative. We ran 20 focus groups across Australia, speaking with Australians across the country and also in key segments. So those who are planning to renovate or build in the next couple of years, those who have renovated or built new homes in the last 5 years, landlords, tenants, and also people who are financially vulnerable and from different financial circumstances. Following that, we conducted an online representative survey with 2,000 people across the nation, representative in terms of age, location and gender, of course. Fieldwork was conducted around the middle of the year. Here just gives you a bit of an overview of the geographical spread, once again just emphasising that we spoke with people across the country, and certainly our quantitative survey had full coverage. Okay, so going straight to some of the results now. We often start some of these surveys with some contextual issues to understand what is the issues landscape, what are people most concerned about, what are secondary concerns. So here you can actually see some of the relevant issues that we put to people, and we ask them how concerned, if at all, they are about these issues related to housing and energy in Australia. Probably no surprises, but really topping that list is the rising cost of power bills. If anything, that's strengthened over recent months, and I'm sure is going to be pretty much the dominant issue over the next year. House prices, also very expensive. People talk about the difficulty of achieving that Australian dream, affording the house of their own. I think before I go on, it's actually interesting just to say that in the context of our issue today and talking about raising the standards for energy efficiency housing, concern with the cost of power bills actually works in our favour. Okay, so people saw it largely as a reason to be undertaking action and a reason to raise the standards, more so than some of the costs associated with making some of those changes. Rising rents, a huge concern as well. I think in talking to people across the country, it really struck me the difficult situation many renters are actually in trying to secure affordable rental. So certainly something that needs to be considered in the context of these reforms. Climate change, very important issue to people. A lot of passion around that, quite a large number of people rating it as one of their top 3 issues. And you can see some of those other concerns. Raising interest rates, availability of rentals, some of those other availability of building materials and so forth. There was a bit of concern around regulation, for example, submitting DAs and so forth, but it was very much secondary to some of those other things that I've mentioned. Just emphasising some of those ones. Okay, so let's look at some of the contextual themes here when we have these conversations with people around not only what they think about energy efficiency, but also fundamentally what makes a good home to live in, what makes a home a good place in which you can live. So at a broad level, I think it's quite important to say how interested and how engaged people actually are on the topic of energy efficiency. This is not just something for boffins. This is not just an inner city issue. You go across the entire country. People are very interested in what they can do to save money, and it's made very relevant to them, particularly through what they see on their electricity bills. So the broad benefits of energy efficient homes very well understood and considered desirable. When we talked about what are the things that make a good house, what make a house a good place to live in, people typically talked about natural light, good airflow, and also importantly having a consistent and comfortable temperature. So cosy in winter, cool in summer, not having to spend too much money to get those desirable outcomes. When we actually looked at what they laddered those features to, it was very much these things. So better health, mental well-being, and well-being more generally, and also power bill savings. Okay, so these are some of the opportunities to make these reforms relevant to people as well. And just finally there, it was actually interesting talking about the way that COVID has actually changed the way that we live and the way that we actually use our homes as well. So it's the layout of our homes, more recognition on the need for healthy air, lack of mould, connection to natural spaces and so forth. Okay, but this is also interesting. People readily acknowledging that there is an energy efficiency gap that needs to be closed. And the Minister touched on some of these statistics before, and really quite striking. Only 28% of people rate the energy efficiency of their homes as an 8 or more out of 10, where 10 would be excellent. When you look at the average rating, on average, it's only rated as 6 out of 10. So really emphasising how poorly our homes are currently performing, and also the gap, but also the opportunity to make things better. Similarly, only 19% rating the energy efficiency of Australian homes as being an 8 or better. And as the Minister alluded to, much worse amongst renters, and also much lower amongst people who are financially vulnerable as well. Okay, so let's look at just some of the barriers. There were a different range of those. I mean, certainly there was an obvious one, what is the cost to make some of these changes to make my home more efficient? But it was quite interesting when we delved into it a little bit more deeply. We found that many linked this idea of energy efficiency to quite expensive modifications. Okay, so people talking about solar systems, batteries, energy efficient appliances, and potentially structural modifications to their homes. Now, certainly those are very important things and important things that many people are aware of. But something that we realised from the research is that for some people, the whole idea of making your home energy more energy efficient seemed out of reach. And there was also a lack of understanding of some of those simpler things that they could be doing at quite low cost to improve the energy efficiency of their home. And certainly there's an opportunity there. So we talked about the level of concern about rising cost of living. But some of these interesting stats, only 44% have block-out blinds. Only 27% say they've draft-proofed their homes. Certainly a straightforward thing that can be done. Only 17% have window film, for example, on their windows, and only a small number, are planning to do so. Certainly replacing your windows with double glazing is extremely expensive and out of reach for many people, but not so much, putting films there. So certainly there's an opportunity there. Okay, we asked people then in our quantitative survey at a very high level, look, Australian state and federal governments are considering how to improve the energy efficiency of all Australian homes. So overall, how much do you support or oppose the following ways to do this? So we went into a little bit more detail later on, and I'll share those results with you. But at very high level, we found that 71% supported improving building standards for new homes and major renovations. Only 4% opposing that initiative in general. So very strong support, and there was 24% who were neither supporting or opposed, who were a bit qualified in their opinion. Similarly, 72% were supporting programs to improve the energy efficiency of existing homes, and only 6% opposing that. And at SEC Newgate, we do a lot of research on a lot of research. I really was struck by the level of support and also the lack of opposition for some of these reforms, particularly when you stack it up against some other energy ideas. Okay, so let's look at some of the support levels for some of the specific energy efficiency proposals. And here you'll just get some of the headline numbers. When you actually look at the report and some of the detail, you'll see that we actually consulted in detail on each of these initiatives. And we also put to people not just what they involve, but also the costs that are involved as well. So what it would cost for an average home to do these things. But in terms of energy efficiency incentives for owners and landlords, so this is like rebates, low interest roads, loans, at least information and advice, 75% supported that. In terms of government retrofitting for social housing, so this might be things like draft ceiling and insulation, replacing inefficient appliances, 73% support there, only 8% opposing that. 73% supporting increasing the thermal efficiency of new homes from 6 to 7 stars, the important detail there. And once again, we actually mentioned how much this is going to add to the cost of an average build, so they had that information. 70% supporting increasing standards, energy efficiency standards to 7 stars for major renovations over $50,000. 70% supporting increasing minimum energy efficiency standards for rental homes. And also, this one was the most contentious, but still very much overwhelming support, 66% supporting mandating energy efficiency disclosure when homes are actually rented or sold. So this would be having an assessment and making sure that information was available to people who would be considering purchase or a new rental. We asked people just very briefly around their preferences to the rollout for the reforms, and people in general thought it should be a phased thing. This is just from their perspectives. Amongst the community, a consideration that probably new builds are probably the easiest place to start. Also, perhaps followed by social housing programs. And there was 2 aspects to that. First of all, there was a social equity dimension in terms of like creating fairness, bringing these energy saving benefits for people who couldn't necessarily afford them, but also setting the example from government to show people what could actually be possible for the rest of the population, and also potentially making some of the building materials, energy efficient building materials, cheaper if they became more readily available. Following that, rolling out guidelines for renovators, and also rolling out guidelines for what could or may need to be changed for existing properties and rentals. And just a belief that perhaps some of those existing owners would need a little bit more time to sort of understand what it involves and so forth. Okay, so another important part of the research was not just consulting with people and understanding their reactions to these initiatives, but also understanding what could be the most effective ways of communicating some of these forms. Many of you are involved in advocating for some of these changes. So what are some of the ways that you can make this relevant to people? So we did lots of sophisticated approaches to testing these things. I won't bore you with the details. But here were some of the results. So some of the strengths to communicate and some of the things that really stood out. This was the most powerful messages. So better building standards will lead to more energy efficient homes that protect people from rising energy bills. So probably no surprise there. It's the protection, it's the cost factor, it's helping people from those shocks, particularly they're going to be experiencing now, but also next year. And you can cut your bills by up to 75% if there was a movement to 7-star efficiency homes and also getting solar energy efficiency, solar power at least. It will lead to better homes, which will be comfortable to live in all year round with no need for excessive heating and cooling. So once again, pushing it down, I guess, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is around security, it's safety, but it's also comfort as well, supporting those basic needs, not just the saving money. So that resonated. A practical set of reforms that will reduce the amount of energy that is wasted by energy efficient homes. So people really relating to this concept of preserving energy and not wasting it. And this was actually a really good one that resonated really well. So whenever we do communications research, we often explore different metaphors. And this one that Energy Consumers Australia was previously using actually worked really well. So, the energy efficiency of a typical Australian home is low, and it's actually closer to that to a tent, right, than a particularly efficient home. So something that resonated really well with people as well. And if we act, we can easily get millions more Australians living in comfortable homes that are efficient to run. And finally, better building standards will help keep people healthier by reducing damp, mould and other issues. Once again, something that has really come to the fore, throughout COVID. So it's around saving money, it's practical steps, it's comfortable homes, it's also healthy homes. They were the biggest strengths that we would suggest using to communicate. In terms of things to reinforce, certainly there were other positives, adding value to people's homes, and certainly that can become more prominent if there's mandatory disclosure of standards. Yes, you might have to pay a bit up front, but there'll be cost savings. Long-term benefits, not just for the people in those homes now, but also future generations and future people who live there. And also reducing carbon emissions. Certainly we know that there is a lot of people who are very passionate, and rightly so, around reducing carbon emissions, moving to net zero. Yes, if you pit them against each other, it's probably the cost savings across the community that resonate a little bit stronger, but both of those things are important to a lot of people. Okay, trusted spokespeople for the reforms. People are very interested. They want information. They want to be going to different information sources that they can trust. So we put forward potential spokespeople to people. We asked who they'd trust the most. This is the proportion of people picking it as one of their top 3 sources. Independent regulatory organisation, the CSIRO, very well trusted as well. Energy Consumers Australia coming up number 3, which was quite nice to see. Also governments. So,
Just planted that.
Look, you might say there are some things that governments aren't trusted so much on, but when it comes to energy efficiency and providing information on what people can do, they also they were quite high when it comes to trusted sources. And you can see some of these others. Electricians, Choice, strong brand there. Less so some of those commercial companies, operating in this space, perhaps, solar retailers and so forth. But it's interesting, yeah, you wouldn't necessarily trust your friend or family member quite so much. So I think, as I said before, I think people are looking for leadership from government. They are interested in social housing rollouts to actually see what is possible and how these things are done. So here are some of the key takeouts. This is my final slide. But just, first of all, there is very strong support for these reforms. Quite surprised with the level of support, the lack of opposition. Certainly there were some barriers. Will it lead to more red tape? Will it lead to more upfront cost? Will people take advantage of some of these changes in a negative way? But once people understand how low cost energy efficient improvements can help minimise their bills and cost of living concerns, the need for these reforms is reinforced even more. It's certainly important to take the effort to actually bring people on this journey. So they're looking for information on the upgrades, what they can do, what the cost is, what are the kind of incentives that are available that they could potentially take advantage of. Certainly a lot of enthusiasm for that. What you can do quite cheaply. So for those people who can't necessarily afford batteries or solar, what are some of the low-cost things they can do? And also providing some examples and demonstrations of that. People looking for government leadership, bringing some alignment across the building industry, certifying authorities, whether that's local governments or so forth, understanding, what needs to be done, what are the actual requirements of me. Better support for households, ideally cheaper materials when it comes to insulation and various other things, and also helping Australia reach its climate goals. This was another thing which I think came out through the qualitative research in particular, and it's the importance of tailoring the requirements to specific locations, specific communities. So some of the people talked about, look, I live in a heritage area, so I don't want to destroy the look and feel of my heritage home. It's an important, if I live in Queensland, I've got a Queenslander, I still want it to look like that. And also, there's some interesting comments understanding the variability of climates as well. I remember I travelled down to Hobart, and it's like people were actually saying, look, Hobart is cold, but we also have really hot days as well. So it's understanding that you need some flexibility there, and also requirements that can be sensitive to those kind of needs. So that is a summary of our research. I might just go back to that last one and leave it up there, but certainly it's been a fascinating project from our perspective, and certainly very grateful for the opportunity to do this research.
And I'm going to hand over now to Rob McLeod from Renew, who with whom was the research partner and a great ally in this research.
Thanks so much, Kerry. Thanks so much, David, for the fascinating presentation and research. And thank you so much to everyone for being here now and to learn about this. We're really, really excited about this report, and it's been a really great process to be working through, to be building this evidence base for the sorts of policies that, the work is underway on a policy response to these issues, non-community and industry engagements with these issues, and having this sort of an evidence base we think is a really critical part of our work on all of this. So thank you so much to SCC Newgate and to David. I will take the chance to introduce our panel now. And I'll go in order. So we've had David Stolper from SCC Newgate. Thank you very much. We've got Penny Siro, who is the Managing Director of the residential, General Manager of the Residential Energy Efficiency Branch of the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. We've got Jenny Edwards, who's the Director of Lighthouse Architecture and Science, an architect here in Canberra and building scientist.
Can't call me an architect. The architects get angry. I'm not an architect.
building scientist in Canberra. My apologies.
No worries.
We do have an architect though
Yes.
here on the panel. So that is Dr. Fiona.
Right, don't tell on her.
Dr. Fiona Gray, who is the CEO of Renew, and we have Lynn Gallagher, the CEO of Energy Consumers Australia. So I'll come back in reverse order, and I'm going to ask each of you along the line. Tell us something about this research that you found surprising, or something that was a surprise to you, or something that you learned out of this. Lynn, I'll start with you. Yeah.
Look, I think there's been so much misinformation before we did this research about, I guess, people who have, misinformation from industry, and I'll just put industry as a global term, but people who are actually either building houses or, doing building work, or electricians, or you sort of name it. It was the sort of sense in which, consumers won't go for this. Like, they really, it's a nice to have. It'll only just increase costs. It'll only just increase rents. So the thing that surprised me is, first up, that you can have a conversation with people around these issues, and that if you do it in a way that's very respectful and puts information in front of them. We weren't trying to do some kind of quick push polling where we go, hey, you'll love energy efficiency, won't you, right? And, that's sort of tempting, and people can do that. So the idea really was to let the research go where the research went. And so we made David go all over multiple places. We made him talk to multiple people. David is also a researcher of great integrity who never tries to sort of, in my experience, pull the wool over people's eyes and sort of get an answer. He's really trying to put the information in front of people. So what you get is solid. So given all that, I was quite surprised to discover, you know, real people, families, households, landlords, think these are actually things that are not nice to have, that are going to be an essential part of our future, and then gave us some really useful insights about, well, how are we going to make that happen? What barriers are we legitimately going to have to overcome? So that was the thing that surprised me.
Fiona?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I was really interested in the disconnect between the perceptions around energy efficiency measures and really what that means, the reality of the payoff for that. So David actually mentioned before, you know, 82% were very concerned about the cost of living rising, and yet only 27% are doing draft proofing. So as you identified, there's a real opportunity there. But also too, that perception that actually to make your home energy efficient is necessarily expensive. Yes, there are some expensive things, but I think it tells us that, you know, there's a lot that we can do around our messaging, the narrative around energy efficiency, about the simplicity of some of the things we can do. Insulation. You know, a 5% gap in your insulation can lead to, you know, up to 30 to 50% drop in its performance. So actually making sure that it doesn't cost you more to actually put that 5% of insulation in. It's about how it's done and making sure that it's done effectively. So I think that was important. And I think another area where that disconnect and where we have a real job to do in joining the dots was around a lot of people identified that reducing climate change was one of their highest priorities, and yet what ranked quite low on that overall list that you provided was people's concern about their own family's carbon footprint.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, how are you not joining the dots between climate change and what you're doing in your own home? So I think why this sort of perception research is really important is because it actually tells us what resonates and what doesn't. If we start talking to people about, well, it's all up to you to do your bit, that's not landing the same way as other messages are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I can honestly say that none of it really surprised me. I'm so excited to see it. But I've been doing this work since 2008. I made the flyer that had that 5% quote on it. And I have been physically testing thermal imaging and air leakage testing and retrofitting houses in Canberra, as well as doing the integrated architecture and science work. We get known for the sort of sexier, bigger architecture projects. But so I've been working with people on this sort of messaging for a long time. We come from a science communication background. And I used to run the My Efficient Electric Home Facebook group that went from 3,000 members through to 60,000 members. So I know there's interest, but I also hear those misconceptions all the time. And yes, draft proofing is absolutely number one. And even here in this town where I've been carrying on about it for years and years and years, there's still a lot of people who don't know that. So thank you. I want to thank you with all of my heart because it supports everything that I've experienced over the last decade. And we do know what to do. We've got to get on with it.
Yeah, I think my flippant response to that question was the same, was, it's not really surprising. And in our area, we do a lot of research on the branding for natters, what messaging resonates when you're trying to sell different policies. And the messages that you found were very consistent with that. What struck me, though, was, again, that message around how energy efficiency is costly and people go to the really expensive items. And I think we've got that challenge of storytelling about the payback period and some of the simple low-cost measures that people can put into place and get a really big energy bill saving from them. And so the third one that was slightly concerning to me, because we do speak to a lot of people about in the industry about what their priorities are for energy efficiency, and the framework for disclosure of residential energy efficiency is one that we hear a lot about, like people saying, get on with that. And the people who were interviewed here, that didn't really resonate with them. So they were saying, we're not sure that we want disclosure at the point of sale and the point of lease. So I think we've got a bit to work through on what is it that's blocking their support for them, and what do they think it means for them.
Yeah, I mean, there was still a lot of support, but you're right, it was a little bit lower. I mean, some part of that was barriers around potential cost to have some of those assessments done when you might just be, say, selling the home pretty quickly or moving out of the home or something like that. So that was one thing that was mentioned there. But I think you guys have covered a lot of the main things. I think for me, the strength of support and the lack of opposition was striking. Like I said, we do a lot of these issues. I typically think, look, you'll get at least 1 in 5 who says no way. But level of opposition was so low. Consistency of support across the country as well. It just wasn't, this isn't just, it's an inner city issue of people who are converted. It really was across the country, a lot of support. I think the other one, which I think is an issue to recognise and to be careful with, is the attitudes of renters. And I think the criticality of the rental crisis, talking with people and how difficult it is for many families and others to actually getting affordable rental housing, and their level of concern that, if I ask my landlord for these things, they'll put up the rent. You know what I mean? So quite strong fear in some cases. So I think that was something that struck home to me as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. A question for you, Jenny. So you work with households who've chosen to build high-performing homes or to consider the energy performance of their homes, and they're taking that step and getting good design done. What do you think is motivating them?
Energy bills, comfort, but doing the right thing. For the ones that come to us for the integrated architecture and science, they are concerned about the environment. You would have got a pretty educated community here in Canberra. So some more so than others, are driven by the environmental issues, but and health, increasingly health, because we've demonstrated many times that the massive impacts on health in the projects here. But more, I'd like to take the moment just to say that we actually do 3 or 4 visits to houses to assess them and advice on retrofit, and that's the work I'm passionate about, and that's where I almost play the role, I think, of the independent regulatory authority, because I used to work for CSIRO and I used to work for the government, and I'm a scientist, and I come in and I test and I advise them on the best bang for buck, so they trust me, and I also think it helps that I'm a woman. And those people are motivated by all of those things again, but increasingly health, particularly after the bushfires here in Canberra, that had a big impact as well, then COVID. People are much more conscious of the climate now. And the renters, we get all sorts of households contacting us. There's definitely demand, but they're overwhelmed, bamboozled, don't know where to begin. So they want someone they can trust to give them a scientific sort of approach. Having said all that, I can tell you the 3 things we need to do. I don't need to go and test every house in Canberra. We actually know what to do.
What are those 3 things?
Draft seal, insulate, starting with the ceiling, hopefully do the walls as well, and get them off gas, put in a reverse cycle system. And bang, you'd have massive, massive health and economic impacts.
So a question for Penny. As I've said, a big part of the rationale for this project and a driving reason behind a lot of this is that it is really important that there's a good evidence base for policymakers and for policymakers to be seeing those consumer attitudes. I'm really curious about about what lessons policymakers can take from seeing these consumer attitudes, and if it will affect, considerations around this process and around the issue.
Thank you. So I think in terms of the lessons for policymakers, number 1 is we should continue with the policies that have already been identified through the trajectory for low energy buildings, which actually address a lot of the kind of recommendations and the findings in the research, because that covers things like minimum standards for appliances, standards for new homes, disclosure for full of energy ratings of existing buildings, and much more. There was also kind of identification of the need for targeted financial support there. So that's kind of number one. Number two is there does seem to be a message about how you particularly support renters and more vulnerable consumers in this transition. And I think that the work that Minister McAllister has announced through the energy performance strategy will help to kind of go into a bit more detail there, and come up with more concrete actions for government.
Absolutely. This is a theme that comes through so strongly in the research, and we're coming back to a lot in our conversation around this, how the barriers can be addressed to people who are facing barriers to higher energy efficiency, particularly renters, particularly people who are on low incomes or financially vulnerable. Lynn, I was wondering if I could ask you a bit about how we should think about those barriers and how we should start the conversation and start getting progress towards addressing some of those barriers for people who are facing them.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think we got probably a lot more thinking to do. But what we've seen in other countries attempting to do this, and the UK has been trying to accelerate the pace of retrofitting, etc., and getting people off gas. They've started a lot sooner than us, and also in the colder parts of North America. To pick up the point Jenny really made, people actually do just feel bamboozled, confused, and fear of things going wrong, fear of failure. So again, I think there's a lot of work to do to build trust. Who will people trust? What information do those people who trust? It was really interesting that the electricians are high up, right? But they're people who are in your home every day. So it's something we also learned through the low income energy efficiency program. It's who are you letting into your home for other reasons? They're there because, they're fixing something, they're doing aged and community care, they might be Meals on Wheels providers. It's actually equipping a whole range of people with information to deal with that sort of fear factor. And it's that fear factor. I'm just going to pick up something Penny was saying. A lot of this stuff, is tried and true, and Jenny's, got the runs on the board to prove it. But when I sit in a room with energy ministers, the fear factor just buzzes around the room the whole time, right? And so, again, I think we've got to really address those things that create fear, and then also and not add to complexity. So the financing is really important as well. And also the thing that people go, this is my home, and how disruptive is it going to be? How long is it going to be? What if I do this disruption now, but then I only have to undo it and do it all later and do it all again, right? I mean, so it's the really practical pathways, roadmaps for each sort of, household, I guess, to figure out, what they're actually going to do. But it can't be sort of, me or policy people saying, oh, here it is and figure it out. We're going to have to work out how we're actually going to engage with people.
Absolutely. So some of the language, a question for Fiona, some of the report, I thought a really interesting part of this was the types of ways people think about their homes and the types of language that gets used to that. So some of us in the room might often try and think about energy. We know that we need to think about energy costs. We know that a lot of us are also thinking about emissions. But there was also a consideration of whether homes are considered comfortable, whether they're considered healthy. I was wondering if any of that language, first of all, resonates with the sort of work that you do and the people you engage with, and how should we be thinking about our homes being comfortable and healthy as well as just affordable to run?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I think, actually when you stop talking about it in a sense that makes it sound fearful, and you just talk about human qualities. Like, everyone wants to live in a comfortable home. And, you know, at Renew, we're sort of we represent households. We're an organisation that serves our membership, who are largely households. And they're the things that they're picking up the phone and asking for advice on, as how do I make my home more comfortable? You know, it's freezing cold in winter, it's stinking hot in summer. How do I do that? COVID, obviously, as David also pointed out, was, you know, brought to the fore the fact that, you know, being in an uncomfortable home, particularly when you've got to work from home, is deeply unpleasant. So people are really starting, if they're not coming to energy efficiency from the perspective of, you know, wanting to do the right thing by the climate or whatever, or they're not coming at it from a perspective of, you know, they want to save money, they're coming at it from a perspective of their own well-being. And I think it's when you can make it a very human, real issue like that, that's really important to the overall narrative about energy efficiency.
And
Rob, can I just... Oh, you go, Penny.
I was just going to say, from a sort of policymaker perspective, having that broad suite of rationale can actually help when ministers and, you know, cabinet members are sitting down to make decisions on where they put taxpayers' money. So the research out of Victoria recently about, you know, energy efficient upgrades actually saving hundreds of dollars on health costs the following winter becomes like a really important piece of evidence for ministerial decision making. So. Absolutely.
I think it's a good point. I was just going to say something that struck me though too, because, you know, everything that you were just saying, Fiona, really resonates with me. But one of the things I was quite shocked by was when Joel Dignam published his citizens' research findings, and ECA promoted those everywhere that I could, including on the Drum, on the ABC and various other things, because I think it was really telling, having real people say, here's my home right now and it's 15 degrees inside.
Or 5 degrees.
Or 5 degrees, right, etc. And then I was really surprised at the sort of counter pushback from other people who went, no, what's wrong with you? Warm yourself, like get a warm electric blanket or something and put a beanie on. And people were posting photos of themselves like sitting there with mittens on in their house with, you know, hats and gloves and a warm thing going, you know, our houses are so terrible, you shouldn't try and be heating the house or making the house comfortable. Sort of look after yourself. So again, there's a sort of strong resonance thing there of sort of self-sufficiency, and this is all too overwhelming. Particularly, I think they probably were renters. Basically doing something about the house is impossible. So this is what we need to do for me. So I think we've really got to understand some of that as well, because it was really quite a strong pushback, you know, going, oh, you privileged people who live in better houses and can do all these nice things to me.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think, I mean, it's probably on the side of that, but I think another thing I was struck by was in speaking with people, some of the transformation stories as well. You know, so I think it was again when I was in Tasmania, you know, just this woman talking to me and saying, look, the house she lived in, and then she, you know, moved to, they built a new house, which is beyond some people, but just the transformation, I can't believe. And in the middle of winter, I hardly have to heat anything. I'm walking around in a T-shirt. It cost me barely nothing, and it just feels so good. You know, so I think, you know, the way it makes...
of life.
You know, some of these stories as well, it's like, yes, yes, it's comfortable, yes, it saves you money, but what does it actually mean for people? And some of those stories and case studies, I think, are really
I can give you a more powerful story than that, from going from a you know, not so good house to a new house here in Flynn. So back in 2011, 2012, people who worked for the ACT government, I did a low income household study of 11 households. Case study 4 in it, we predicted we could save 40% on energy costs. We did. We saved on average $250 in the winter quarter for the 11 houses. Anyway, this one household, young mum, toddler and a baby, constant respiratory issues, went to the house. With small budgets, this project only had budgets of around $5,000, but for this household, all we did was top up the ceiling insulation, put a draft stopper on her exhaust fan in the bathroom, and she had one in the kitchen as well. We also managed to get her some wall insulation. And showed her how to open the blinds on the northern window and to move the dining table and have the kids play in the sun. Their lives were totally transformed. And that happened in 2011. And I think that was the project that transformed things for me too. I'd already been doing it for 3 years. And there have been many like that, but that one was just profound. And we did have data logging from that house. And the temperatures in the children's bedroom were just diabolical. Simple measures completely transform people's lives.
But I mean, as a counterpoint, Lynn, to that, it was pretty buoying in this research to find that people found priority number 2 was social housing upgrades.
Absolutely.
That was great.
Absolutely. Yeah, which is again sort of going as a community, we don't think that's a good thing, that people should be in substandard housing.
That's right. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Well, in a moment, we'll throw it open to the floor for people to ask questions of the panel. But I would just like to reflect a bit on energy prices and what's happening now, because this research was conducted, I believe interviews were between April and July, roughly. I might be wrong on the exact dates, but we know that since that time, there's every sign that retail prices are going up. We've had the Treasury suggesting that prices will be going up 44 to 56% over the next couple of years at the retail level for gas and electricity, respectively. And this has every potential to have some really, really serious impacts on households. I'm wondering, partially as a question to you, David, about the research, but also I'll throw it to the panel as well. Do we think that this is going to impact the findings here or people's attitudes towards the issue more broadly?
I think, if anything, it probably strengthens the case for change. I think it's, the need to reduce bills is going to become more and more important. The focus that people have on energy efficiency and what they can do to make savings, I think, is only going to get stronger. We also do a monthly issue tracker just for our own purposes at SEC Newgate. And it was actually interesting. This is going to come out very shortly, but we put some of these same initiatives up against a raft of other energy actions that government could potentially take, gas reservations, large-scale solar, a lot of other things. This actually came at the very top, so it's surprising, really. So I think, if anything, it's strengthened.
And I think too the difference starts to make the payback period for those more expensive investments that you might make to improve the energy efficiency makes it a whole lot faster. Because if you're taking out a mortgage for a new home and you're going to uplift your energy efficiency, the amount that you're going to save on your energy bills by having done that is going to pay down that initial investment you made so much faster, comparatively speaking. If so you actually start. It really starts to shift the equation, and that will start to shift perceptions as well around, I can't do this because it's too costly.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just make one comment though. I guess what my worries are, so I think it does change the imperative, but my worries too are that some of the stuff we saw here where people don't think of the simple things they can do. So it probably does heighten that, but the worry is too that I'm thinking about a lot is that people then get a bit of paralysis about as well, so that everything seems so enormous. The rate of increase seems so enormous. The cost of living pressures are bearing down hard on them. Their housing costs are going up. So again, I think it doesn't change a lot of research, but I think it highlights some of the things that we've got to really try and mitigate. Because the people who have the ability, if you like, the means and opportunity to do solar and haven't done it yet, well, they may feel more motivated with energy prices. But I'm really worried about households below median income. That's 50% of households. And I'm really worried that they just get even more overwhelmed.
I can tell you in small business specialising in this space, demand is actually dropping off. I mean, we've got wait lists and we've got but the demand is dropping off. And I've got 15 staff, half of them are struggling to find places to live and do things. Everyone is really stressed, and I think we're not going to be able to afford to do a lot of construction work. So it is going to become small scale retrofit that we have to focus on. But the great news is that can have profound impacts. So, but yes, we need to get that message out more loudly. But yeah, people are incredibly stressed and overwhelmed, and I'm already seeing that change in the more privileged market that I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
That's the idea that rising energy prices are resulting in fewer people seeking energy efficiency.
It's the rising prices of everything here.
That's a sobering and something for us to be thinking about very, very deeply. I'll throw it open to the floor now, and I'd invite any questions or comments from the room to anyone on our panel here. In the back there.
Thanks, James Pico, Director of Residential Energy Efficiency in the Commonwealth. Firstly, David, Lynn, just want to commend the great work on this research. I think it's really valuable to be able to start shining that light on, not just I guess, the case for the policies, but also what people actually think about these and ordinary people. I suppose my question is that I think one of the key findings, obviously, is that people do want policies to improve energy efficiency, particularly in relation to things like vulnerable households, rentals. I guess maybe starting with David is, how do you think we turn it from wanting these policies to advocating for these policies? Because I think that's the real next step, is that to really bolster government action, and this government's, and as Minister McAllister was saying, is really wanting to see action in this space. But how do we kind of get that consumer advocacy actually coming to support this as well? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think certainly a big part of it is the way that you frame the issue. We talked a bit about the messaging, so I won't reiterate some of that. I think, making it real to people, through those case studies, and we mentioned that, I think is really important as well in some of the transformations. I think in terms of people becoming advocates, I don't know how you build that, but I think it's certainly an important part of it. I know when people, considering getting solar, it is very much the experiences of people they know and the experiences of other people who've done it and how did it work for you, which ones to get. People have made the changes, seen the benefits, are often very proud of those things and very happy to talk to people. I was on a plane a while ago, and this old lady in Queensland, she was telling me, we got this, but we just didn't get any old solar panels. We got the ones, that were suggested by NASA for some reason. My husband this and that. And I was like,
bragging rights.
But I guess what I say is people love to talk about it. So I think tapping into some of those experiences and stories would be important, I would suggest.
One of the things that as policymakers we need to be careful of is that we don't just surround ourselves with industry reps, so, the building industry or the appliance sector, when we're coming up with particular targeted policies, but also making sure that we have ECA and Joyce and other voices very much in the tent. So it's really designing our engagement to bring that consumer voice to the fore.
I think the case studies are absolutely critical. I've been involved in the ACT, the Conservation Council here. I'm on the board, put together the Make the Switch website, which is all about getting off gas, and it's got great case studies, and I do an energy efficiency video in that. But then we come to things like Sustainable House Day and Solar House Day, and in Canberra we have the Design Canberra Festival. I've just had 3 renovation projects open to the public, and they're all to talk about those things. We have to get those case studies out there because people cannot relate to it. They cannot imagine that their house can be so much better. So we have to get out there and talk about it more.
I think the value of some of this sort of research too, though, is it also gives politicians licence to start having these conversations, because it's tested the water that consumers, the people that vote for you want this. So it's almost a licence to sort of, of course politicians don't want to make unpopular decisions. I mean, I know, that they have to, but it's much easier for them to not have to make unpopular decisions. So if they've got that groundswell behind them and research like this tells them that that's the sentiment, that's really important.
And look, I'm no psephologist, but only 3% opposition to some of these policies to me seems like a pretty good deal on that front. So I think it's a really important point. Are there any other comments or questions?
I'm just curious as to if there was any prioritising in the messaging. You had about 5 different messages that were up on the board on the slide. Was there any sort of that were sort of the highest versus the lesser ones? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So and we actually tested a bigger set as well. So I think we started probably, I think it was about 16 or so. So some were a lot better than others. But those ones that I presented on that slide were in order. So I think there was those 5 that I had on the left of that slide. So I think, the top 5 was, first of all, just to reiterate, was, protecting people from rising energy bills. You can cut your bills by 75% by going 7 stars and having solar. Better homes that'll be comfortable to live in all year round with no need for excessive heating and cooling. So just that fundamental qualitative, this is how it's going to feel, really resonated. Not wasting energy, just fundamentally as well, people not liking that. The one using the metaphor of a tent, I think was quite surprising to people. That resonated really well. And also keeping people healthier, reducing mould. I think that was also reflecting the COVID experience. So that was the top 5. There were other ones that were good as well. So certainly, some of those which spoke about climate change as well, certainly important secondary ones, adding values to people's homes. There's lots of good benefits that can be used as part of the picture, but those 5 were really the top ones that I'd suggest that you focus on if you want to maybe talk in this area.
I just want to maybe take this segue slightly into a different direction as well but it also comes back to your messaging point. I guess one of the things that I didn't do when working with Renew, and I do want to acknowledge this was a very much a partnership with Renew. What I didn't do was tell David, I guess, what I wanted to hear or what I expected to see. And there is one element, though, that I think is missing still in Australia, and it does link to the decarbonisation challenge, but it also does link to the fact that most of our homes have an energy efficiency rating of less than 2. So a lot of this is really about, are people motivated? Would they be motivated? Would they be resisting? And the answer is overwhelmingly no. They see the value. The challenge is then translating that in from motivation to action and making it happen. But there's a bigger thing here that I think we've missed a trick in Australia, which is, in a way, this is still driven by personal choice. Or in the case of, government-owned housing, governments can do something about that, or Defence Force can do something about their housing. But most of us, or most of the community, a lot of housing that's rented is owned by most of the community. People have one for themselves and a negatively geared house. And I think what we're missing is a trick in a way that we really should be having a discussion about. Shouldn't every home be at some kind of minimum standard by 2050? And what would that take? What would that take at scale? And what would it take at pace? Because it's going to take us 2 decades, 3 decades to do this. It's probably the hardest time to start now with supply chain issues and workforce issues and everything else. But I think we need to be setting this up for every home. By 2050, has to be moved up past some kind of a standard because, even if we confine global warming to 1.5 degrees, we know what it's going to be like in Australia in terms of extreme weather. So I think that's perhaps another element that is a different project, and I didn't want to force onto this project or drive this project to that kind of discussion, but I think it is another piece of the puzzle.
There's probably an opportunity now with the National Energy Performance Strategy to actually set specific goals and the specific actions and targets and to hit those points.
Yeah. And Minister McAllister has asked that in the consultation paper. He said, what is the value of targets? So to me, you can leave this as very community driven and, you know, family driven and small business driven, or you can also say we're going to set some targets, but to set some targets we're also going to set in place mechanisms for enabling people to be part of those targets.
Yeah. Alan Pears and I have this fantasy I raised yesterday. ACT government people, I would like to go out and target a suburb. Let's choose Charnwood, low socioeconomic area. Let's target Charnwood and get some support and go in and draft seal and install ceiling insulation and get them off gas, put a reverse cycle split system. I think we could show amazing things if we, which you could see at a broader level looking at the suburb, I'm sure. So I'm rambling now, but I agree completely. I do want to flag though that the minimum standards in terms of star ratings is really complex. I've chatted with the ACT government about minimum ceiling insulation standards we've introduced here because there is such difference between existing housing stock, and some of them will achieve a minimum standard without doing much and others will have to do a lot more. So I would say, you know, minimum insulation standards that they are maybe air leakage tested or they're draft sealed and we get them off gas. That's a target that's so achievable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a whole other complex question, but also I think too from a people point of view when it comes to disclosure, to a bit the point about bragging about the NASA solar panels. We think about, you know, NAITHs and all those other things and minimum standards and stars, but actually what people want to be able to do is go, my home is quality A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to think about that missing piece as well.
Yep. Definitely.
As a almost as a communication and a bragging thing too, to me.
Well, we're going to be wrapping up quite soon, and as Kerry has said, there will be drinks, so please do stay for that. I will put everyone on the spot before we finish though, and just go back down the line again. And I'd like to just ask you if there's one thing that you'd like people to take away from this, either the research or the issue more broadly, the conversation today. What would you like people in the room now to be taking away from this? And I'll go back in this direction, so I'll start with you, David.
Okay, on the spot, I think it's the size of the opportunity, the desire that people have to improve their lives and to take action, but they need guidance. They're looking for government leadership, I think, would be the one thing for me.
The cheapest unit of energy is the one you don't use.
Right.
Draft sealing is sexy. Don't be seduced by double glazing.
Yeah.
Don't double glaze first. Draft sealing. Double glazing is down the list. That's my pitch over.
Is it bumper sticker?
I think it's about, it has to be a holistic thing. So we need that household bottom-up groundswell as well as the top-down, and the two have to be working to support each other.
I guess mine is given people are motivated, let's find a way to translate that motivation into action. Let's make it easy, simple, doable, and done at scale. And yes, there is a clip of President Obama saying energy efficiency is sexy.
Well, look, on that note.
So maybe if I get Albo, maybe I'm going to go and get Albo, right? Maybe that's my challenge. I want Albo to say, let's make energy efficiency sexy.
I have offered to go and air leakage test and draft seal the lodge, everybody, of influence.
Oh, that would be a
I did
disaster.
have one of the advisors contact me about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, watch this space. Watch this space. I look forward to. Look, thank you so much to everyone on the panel. It's been a really, really great discussion. I've really, really enjoyed this. And thank you so much to everyone for being here now. And I'll hand back to Kerry.
Thank you, Rob. Again, and thanks to the panel, and congratulations on what was a really good first go at unpacking the policy implications of this research. And one we hope won't be the last. So thanks to the panel. And I don't have an elegant way to finish this, but I did have a reflection, which is, you know, this is a big problem. The conversation we've heard has just underlined that, you know, it's complex, it's big, but I'm really heartened by the fact that this is a conversation that we wouldn't have heard, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, that we actually now are bringing the right people in the room. And we're bringing, I'm sitting in a whole lot of meetings where there's an awful lot of goodwill and good intent to actually try and fix this and make, this part of our world a better place. So, and that's due in large part to the people sitting in this room. So thank you to the audience, both for coming, but also for the work you're doing to support this, these better outcomes for Australian households and small business. So thank you.